Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I've had a couple people ask me, hey Jason, you sometimes promote a little bit of minimalist training, sometimes you say that low volume is fine, but Dr. Brad Schoenfeld has come out with data showing that you need at least 10 to 12 sets per body part to stimulate maximum growth, sometimes more, but that's your bare minimum to get maximum growth stimulation per week. How do you reconcile that with what you're saying? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this, because I think people are really misunderstanding that. What they need to understand is that when Dr. Brad made those statements, he also kind of pointed out that includes all your compound movements, that you don't have to come in and isolate every muscle for 12 sets. There's no need to do that to achieve that. It just isn't necessary. That your compound movements count towards this. And it's people who do a ton of isolation work who are saying, well, that seems like fairly high volume. You know, you're saying people don't need that many sets. You guys better stop and look at some of the programs I have out. Some of the programs I have out have you doing 20 or 30 sets per body part. That's extremely high volume. Like my novice 5x5 program is an extremely high volume program. So much so that some people can't handle it. And again, it's because people are caught up in this idea that when you say 12 sets for your biceps or 12 sets for your delts, they're thinking curls, they're thinking laterals, they're not thinking chin-ups, barbell rows, overhead press, bench press. Those things work all of these muscles too, and so he clarified that. And what I mean is that to hit 10 to 12 sets per body part, you're talking about like 3 20-minute workouts a week. If you're doing big compounds for everything, that really isn't that much. It's what ends up making workouts last a really long time or have people spending a lot of time in the gym is because they're trying to work every plane and angle and do 4 or 5 different isolation movements per body part. This is where you're getting a lot of this really high volume, as people are calling it. No, it's just doing large amounts of isolation work. It isn't difficult to get 10 to 12 sets with compound movements, and I'll tell you guys exactly what I mean. What would be the bare minimum to pull this off? And I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but if someone really wanted to cut it down to minimal exercises, you could come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, do a little bit of a warm-up. Monday and Wednesday you could do clean and push press, power clean it up and push press. With 3 minutes between, do 5 sets. You could be out of the gym in less than 20 minutes. Friday, come in and do 5 sets of deadlifts. 5 sets of deadlifts. Everything but maybe the biceps, because the power cleans done at the start might not count as a full set. It's 1 rep. So you've only really done about 10 reps for biceps, although the deadlifts put a little bit of stress on the biceps. The biceps might be lagging a little bit, a couple of the arm muscles. But what muscle didn't get at least 10 sets? What muscle didn't get at least 10 sets doing that? Without even throwing the power clean in there, push press. Works quads, hamstrings, glutes, your entire core, spinal erectors, a lot of the upper back, all 3 heads of the delt get worked to some extent, the traps, the triceps, the pecs. Deadlifts are working everything but the pecs, the triceps, and the delts. And to a lesser extent, the biceps. I mean, a few muscles didn't get hit. That would be really easy to finish up, though. What could someone add to something like that? I don't know. Do a few sets of chin-ups. Do some chin-ups. Then you've hit everything that you've possibly missed with those 2 exercises. We're not talking about a lot of volume here. It's because people get caught up in all this body part training that they don't understand and grasp the perspective that we are talking about fairly low volume. I mean, it really isn't hard to get 10 to 12 sets in, and particularly when you start doing multiple movements. What happens when you're coming in every week and you're doing multiple sets of squats of some type? I don't care if it's front squats, high bar squats, low bar squats. You start doing like 5+ sets of squats a week, and not many people only do 5 sets of squats. The only people doing 5 sets of squats are people who are on body part splits or people who don't care about their squat. Right? But 5 sets of squats, You're coming in doing 5 sets of deadlifts. You do 5 sets of bench press, 5 sets of dips, 5 sets of overhead press, 5 sets of chin-ups, 5 sets of barbell rows of some type. Throughout the week, start doing the math on this. Start looking at that, particularly if your overhead press turned into a push press. I don't care if it's a front press, behind the neck press. You have body parts. If you were to just do 5 sets every week, I don't care how you split them up. I don't care whether you're doing them as a push-pull legs. I don't know. I'm not sure how you would do that with squats, 25 sets of squats. Or you're doing a full body or some sort of upper, lower, hybrid, whatever you're going to do. I don't care how you split them up. If you do 5 sets of all those exercises every week, how many exercises are we talking about there? We're not talking about many. Squat, deadlift, bench, dip, overhead press, chin-ups, rows. That's 7 exercises. 35 total sets a week. 35 total sets a week. That is easily done in 3 sessions. That's easily done in less than an hour. Because again, only doing 35 sets a week, 10 sets of workout with 3 minutes between, you're talking 45-minute workouts. 45-minute workouts tops, 3 times a week. That's barely over 2 hours of lifting. That absolutely would blow out of the water those numbers. That would blow those numbers out of the water, and you haven't even done any direct isolation work yet. So, I mean, think about that. Your chest alone is getting 20 sets. Go back and look at that. Because what works the chest? Bench press, dips, overhead press. Chin-ups work the upper chest, proven in EMG studies. So people will argue, okay, that's not a great chest exercise. Maybe it's not, but the other 3 are. 15 very direct chest builders. 20 if you want to count stuff with a little less focus on the chest. It still works it to some extent, enough that we can measure it. Like 20 sets for your chest. Bicep, at least 10 sets. And again, we haven't even talked about, are you power cleaning up the push presses? At least 10 sets for biceps. It's a smaller muscle. Think about this way. When you talk about 10 to 12 sets, smaller muscles don't need that many sets. They really don't. And you're working at the bicep from 2 completely different angles with a row versus a chin-up. You've got a pronated versus a supinated grip. Delts are getting an enormous amount of work. It's not just the overhead press. You got 2 different types of chest exercises that work the front delt, which it does radiate through it to some extent. You got 2 different pulling exercises that work the back delts, and you got the overhead press. Delts are getting 25 sets. 3 completely different angles are being hit. 25 sets for delts and something like that. Legs, squat, deadlift. There's at least 10 sets there between just these 2 exercises if you only did 5 sets a week. Though in the push press, now you got 15 sets. Lats, 15 sets. People are like, well, where'd that 15 come from? I didn't even count a power clean in there. Chin-ups, rows, lat work. How about deadlifts? Anyone looked at Brett Contreras' EMG study on the lats? Deadlifts stimulate the lats massively. You can build lats off nothing but deadlifts. Am I saying that deadlifts should be your only lat builder? No, never said that. But it counts. It is absolutely a measurable lat stimulator. Tremendous stimulator. Works arguably as well as a lot of sort of rows do, or lat pull downs. It's arguably. Some people would say more, but I don't think the data is conclusive enough to say that, but it's at least in the ballpark. 15 sets for your lats right there. That's only doing 5 sets of 7 exercises. Every muscle in your body is getting between 15 and 25 sets. That's only 45 minutes 3 times a week. So when we come back and look at this and people say, well, 10 to 12, that doesn't always mesh with what you're saying. Why isn't it? It's you guys are in that mindset of thinking that curls are the only bicep exercise. Chin-ups are better than most types of curls are. Again, if we were to only go off EMG data, which isn't reliable enough to say with that, but we can argue they're in the ballpark. I do know experts in biomechanics who do think chin-ups build biceps better than curls. But this is before we've gone to any isolation work, and almost everybody does some sort of isolation work. But big compounds tend to work a lot of muscles. And when you start doing multiple types of big compounds for multiple sets a week, that 10 to 12 starts becoming really, really easy to hit, and it becomes really easy to surpass. And a lot of people get this idea in their head that isolation movements stimulate more muscle growth in a given muscle than compounds do. No, they don't always do so. Yes, there are cases to where they can. Obviously, a lateral done to the side is going to work the lateral head of your delt more than a bench press will. Okay, no argument about that. But do you think a front raise is going to work your front delt more than a bench press? I don't think so. You really think a concentration curl is going to build more bicep than a chin-up? I mean, go back and let's look at some of the arm muscles. Look at the studies we've seen on noobs. And this isn't necessarily advanced lifters, but in noobs, we found that adding curls and tricep extensions to the lat pull down and the bench press didn't cause any more muscle growth, not a significant amount. Same people did a separate study and had people only do lat pull downs and another group only do curls. The lat pull down group gained slightly more muscle. The lat pull down. All right, when you think about the angle of pull, that isn't even as efficient of a bicep exercise on the concentric rep. It isn't. Because of the line of pull, that's not even the most ideal use of the bicep. So we could argue, well, how did that happen? That doesn't make sense. Well, it does in the fact that if we start looking at the eccentric component with the heavier load because of the compound, there might be more total stimulation. So when you start looking at the way a lot of these big compound movements work, particularly when you get into barbell stuff, particularly barbell stuff where you're standing, okay, it's one thing to talk about a chest supported row or a machine row as a compound. It's another thing when you're standing rowing. All right. One thing to talk about getting under a machine and doing a shoulder press. It's another thing to clean the weight up and press it over your head standing with a barbell. Standing movements to where you have to stand and support a barbell work enormous amounts of muscle through the body. And people need to understand that. When you look at this data, what Brad is saying is that, yeah, you need at least 10 to 12 sets to stimulate maximum growth. But he pointed out that's not direct work, that's total work, counting your compound movements also. But I mean, realistically, 45 minutes, 3 times a week, you can surpass that absurdly easily. As long as you're picking nice big compound movements that work a lot of muscles. And I mean, and again, this is before you even get to your isolation work. Most people are going to do a few curls. Most people are going to do a little bit of delt work. They're going to do these things. A lot of people aren't realizing they're getting up to 30 plus sets sometimes, thinking they're doing 10, because they're not factoring in all the different muscles that get worked. And the data is pretty conclusive on this. These big compounds build these smaller muscles. All right, they do it just as well as the isolation movements do. It's about exercise economy. And again, need to point out that's not being anti-isolation. That's just saying that for most people's goals, most of the muscles in your body can be built fairly quickly and fairly efficiently doing nothing but compounds. Isolation work, because it doesn't do as much. I mean, isolation movements usually only build one muscle. If you're going to take time out of your routine to only build one muscle, instead of picking an exercise that's going to build 2 or 3 muscles or more, you need to have a reason to have it in there. It needs to be because you actually have something that's lagging enough or that needs enough direct work because of some imbalance that's there, that it's worth taking time out of your routine to only stimulate one muscle. And that's perfectly reasonable. I mean, if you've got a valid reason to do it, you have a muscle that you know needs additional work, it makes total sense to do that. Particularly when all the other muscles in that chain are well developed. If your back is massive, because probably you've put a lot of focus on deadlifts, and you don't feel that it needs to grow anymore, and you're already doing some chin-ups, yeah, sure, you could get the rest of your bicep work from some curls. But if you're a guy who has a tiny back, your back is lagging, you only deadlift 300 pounds for a couple reps, your back is lagging, I wouldn't waste a lot of time with curls for your biceps. Do more chin-ups, because you can kill 2 birds with one stone. And that's the whole point here. It is about being efficient with your time. And when you're efficient with your time, you're efficient with your exercises, hitting 10 to 12 reps per body part is absurdly easy and absurdly quick. That is actually borderline minimalist training. That's minimalist training. Like I said, that could technically be done in 20 minutes 3 times a week. If you were to stretch it down to the bare minimum, what's the bare minimum number of exercises and reps and sets you could do? You could probably hit that with most of the muscles in your body with less than an hour of training a week. All right, we're talking, that's minimalist training. We're getting down to enough to where I'd say, I really wouldn't advocate only doing that small amount of work. You probably need a bit more than that, ideally. Because even I'm saying, look, you probably need to live more than an hour a week, probably at least an hour and a half a week. But that could be pulled off in an hour. That's minimalist training. That number isn't as high as people think it is. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.